Are you sitting in with me? Hi, baby girl. Are you the quality manager? You making sure I do my job properly? Yeah, you are.
Hello everyone, I'm back! I took July off to get some rest and get some other things organised, but we are now back in business, and here's one of the first topics that we're looking at. So there's a dandy little film out right now that is absolutely dominating Netflix about 3 girls in a K-pop group slaying demons. I don't know if you've heard of it, you might have heard of it. It's already surpassed 100 million views in 5 weeks, and is continuing to break streaming records, which is honestly kind of crazy. I finally sat down to watch it, and I gotta say, it's very clear-cut as to why it's doing so well. It has a fantastic art direction, the animation is phenomenal, and it's riding the wave of this massive worldwide K-pop mania that's going on right now. I'm not huge on K-pop, I like a couple of groups, but I can understand completely why other people might love it. But what really stuck out to me with this film is how it can be read as such a scathing meta discussion as to not only the nature of the pop music industry, not necessarily K-pop, but also the ever-evolving discussions surrounding self-love, mental health, generational trauma, and of course today's focus, generational healing. So I have touched upon mental health and to an extent generational trauma a fair few times here on this channel, but after watching K-pop Demon Hunters, which we're going to shorten to KDH for most of this, the film ended up highlighting to me that there is a huge phenomenon occurring within newer generations where views on traditions and trauma are both at their highest rates of acceptance and exploration, but at the same time are at the most volatile. And it is an incredibly interesting scenario that we found ourselves in when it comes to this. What's even more interesting about it is that this film takes place in South Korea, which has a pretty infamous reputation of not necessarily being the best at understanding and tackling these issues specifically, and on top of that is currently also experiencing a very rapid economic boom thanks to the aforementioned K-pop industry entering the global stage. This boom presents a plethora of drawbacks as well as positives, as it is forcing the population to clash head-on with traditional ideals versus rapidly modernising sensibilities, and I think this is also something that should be examined in relation to any media that chooses to focus on modern pop culture. So I wanted to use this film as a case study to take a dive into all of this, but primarily the discussions surrounding both generational trauma and generational healing, as it felt like this was an extremely prevalent theme within the film. I'll also be looking into some other examples of this from other media, but strap in because we're going to be talking a lot about K-pop. If you like the sound of that, then please consider dropping a like and hit the subscribe button. I know people don't like it when YouTubers do all of our plugs and such, but it helps us pay our bills, so any interaction from you all is greatly appreciated. There will be spoilers, so be wary if you haven't seen the film yet, because I will be discussing pretty much everything. This is your first and only warning. Please note that any opinions expressed in this video are purely speculative and not based in fact, unless evidence is given to state the contrary, and without further ado, let's get into it. Before we get properly stuck into our core discussion, we need to understand why this film popped off the way that it has, and to do that, we need to understand some of the more external components surrounding it and how they came together. So to begin, giveaway title notwithstanding, but what is the plot of K-pop Demon Hunters actually about? The story follows 3 girls, Rumi, Mira, and Zoe, who are the newest generation of guardians that use their voices to create a magical barrier that protects the human world from demons. To do this, they form the K-pop trio Huntrix and use their music as a way to harness the love channeled from their fans to strengthen this barrier to become its most powerful, known as the Golden Honmoon. Rumi, the leader, however, has her own reasons for wanting to perfect the Honmoon as quickly as possible, as she is in fact half demon herself, and her demon half, which is shown as purple patterns across her skin, is beginning to affect her voice. She has been taught her entire life to hide this demon side of her away, even from the other girls, and that the Golden Honmoon will eliminate it permanently. At the 11th hour of being sealed away forever, the demon lord Gima allows 5 demons, headed by Jinu, to try and beat the girls at their own game by forming the Saja Boys group and pilfering Huntrix's fans as offerings to their king. The girls quickly realize what the boys are, and after an altercation between them, Jinu finds out about Rumi's demon side, and the two begin to have their own secret rendezvous where he then explains to Rumi that demons exist from shame, and that Gima is able to control demons by essentially causing them to relive that shame over and over. Jinu's shame in particular comes from Gima pulling some strings to allow him to be a musician for the king 400 years ago, in exchange for leaving his family behind. This of course upends Rumi's initial perspective as a hunter and simultaneously allows her to better understand and accept her own demon qualities, thus healing her voice, but it also puts her at odds with Mira and Zoe, who are by contrast a lot more ruthless by virtue of not knowing this aspect of Rumi's heritage. All they know is demon bad, kill all demons. All of this comes to a head during the Idol Awards, where Rumi is tricked into performing a song that was initially created by the girls to hit back against the Saja Boys, but instead has her demon patterns revealed on stage, causing her to lose control of her demon side and shatter both the girls' trust in her for not not telling them the truth, as well as the honeymoon they tried so hard to preserve and strengthen. Just as the Saja boys have now seized Huntrix's fans, as well as Mira and Zoe, and even their manager Bobby, who is, like, the best character in the film, by the way, they bring them all to one final concert where they reveal themselves and present their victims to Gima, who has now exited the demon world, ready to feast on countless souls. It is at this critical moment that Rumi emerges to sing one final song, bringing her two friends back to themselves, and the three band together to push the demons back. Jinu sacrifices himself in the process to help Rumi succeed, and the girls instead create a rainbow honeymoon that stems from not only the love of their fans, but their love and acceptance for each other, flaws and all. Honestly, there's a lot going on in there, but it is so well constructed narratively and thematically that it just flows very effortlessly, and you don't even really question the absurdity of demon boy bands, which, I'm just gonna say, I've watched tons of blockbuster superhero films with more outlandish concepts, so this is actually a very well thought out and executed story, and if people want to cry out that it's cringe or whatever else I've been hearing on the grapevine, then you're just embarrassing yourselves at this point, because who actually cares about cringe in films except for boring people who don't have any sense of personal taste? That aside, we also have the understanding that this film is produced by Sony, aka the company currently riding the high of producing the Spider-Verse trilogy, aka the most celebrated and anticipated animated films we have seen in a very long time. And there do happen to be some hallmarks to Sony's current stylistic approach present within this film. For example, the human characters are animated at 2 frames per second, whereas the demons move on ones. And those who watched the film may have also noticed that when Rumi grows closer to Jinu and comes to better understand her demon side, she also begins to be animated on ones as well, which is a really cool tidbit that is borrowed from Spider-Verse, where different Spider-Men move at different frame rates. And there are a bunch of really cool tidbits for animation fans to enjoy in this film. During the film's first song, the scene has a really good balance of motion versus still shots so that the action has room to breathe and build upon itself. It's just built up of so many well-constructed moments that I'm honestly really impressed. To me at least, it was fairly obvious that the second anyone who was remotely interested in animation realized that KDH was produced by the same studio that brought us Spider-Verse, which is famous for its groundbreaking art style and story direction, they knew they were going to be in for a good time. And what's also really exciting and interesting is that apparently this film was cut down from a 3-hour runtime, so there is a lot of lore and narrative connotations that you can dig into outside of watching the actual film itself. And if you're a fan of concept art, I'd very heavily recommend checking out some of the initial ideas and designs for the characters, because my god. Also, side note, but when I found out there were even some pieces done by someone who works on Kipo and the Age of Wonder Beast, I almost lost it. I love that show. But what I don't think the studio itself probably anticipated was just how popular this film would become. Like, I can imagine that they absolutely believed that they would make back some of the production budget, and that the film would be a hit with a specific demographic, re K-pop stans and the like, but becoming the #1 Netflix film in such a short amount of time, I'm not entirely convinced that that was on the cards. If anything, I think they likely coordinated its release in order to generate some funding for the final Spider-Verse film, hence why it was released on a streaming platform, as opposed to getting a theatrical release to cut back on things like theatre distributions and marketing. And I think this worked massively in KDH's favour, especially when taking into account its target audience is one that has become fully accustomed to the age of streaming. Following this ushering in of a new age of media consumption, a big social shift has occurred when it comes to people's willingness to watch a film on the big screen versus in their homes. And this is especially relevant with animation. There is a bit of a misconception at the moment that animation in particular is a dying industry, but that's not necessarily what's going on. What's actually happening is the box office model is shifting towards safety. Animation is very time consuming and expensive to produce, and in recent times this has led to a lot of budget restrictions in the form of cutting staff members, which increases the chance of job creep happening, and supplementations being implemented such as AI to replace some of that lost labour for a fraction of the cost. These decisions are usually made by people who are not doing any of the creative work, and probably never will, typically executives who have never animated in their lives, and this ends up constricting a project's creative freedom by a significant amount. And the box office, aka ticket sale accumulation from cinemas, make up the majority of what ends up receiving the small crumbs of funding remaining after the bigwigs already had their cake and ate it. For the past decade-ish, despite the fact that it has experienced a boom in popularity among adults as well as kids, animation, much like the wider film industry, has become a much more turbulent profession than it used to be. Jobs are becoming less permanent and stable, offering less benefits, and are instead almost entirely shifting towards a gig/freelance economy. What ends up happening with this is that we end up with a lot of projects that don't have the level of polish and intrigue that a lot of audiences expect now. Well, either that or they get cancelled after a single season when they do. So instead, these audiences will go back to rewatch older media that was created back when this issue wasn't so prevalent and lament about how cartoons and films aren't what they used to be. Ergo, many studios will pick up on streaming numbers for their respective media properties and realize that older shows and films are being enjoyed at present, and this creates the false perception that there is a demand for new iterations of older IPs, which I think is what's contributing to so many remakes and sequels coming out at the minute, because not only do we know that certain IPs have an existing fan base and therefore a guaranteed audience who will pay cinema prices to see them, but streaming has effectively created a situation in which if people are unsure of whether they will enjoy a film that is currently in cinemas, especially if it's an original story, they will instead opt to wait until that film is available on a streaming platform rather than waste their money, because unfortunately cinemas are not the low-cost experience that they used to be. And don't get me wrong, this used to happen way before streaming. It happened when we had DVDs, but you still had to pay for the individual film, so it's not quite the same. And while this isn't exactly an aspect of generational healing, I do think this is a decent example of breaking convention, since it involves ending a cycle. If you go to a cinema and spend an audacious amount on tickets and snacks, only to find out that the film you paid for is shit, you're gonna feel pretty cheated. But at least with a streaming platform, you're not spending anything extra than the subscription that you're already paying, and can just switch to something else if you don't vibe with it. Eventually, it's going to get to a point where cinemas either need to seriously reevaluate the current model or be rendered obsolete in favour of streaming platforms. Now, personally, I don't want that to happen because I enjoy the experience of going to the cinema, but I understand why it's headed that way because even I've noticed it in my own viewing habits. There's this cinema chain in the UK called the Everyman, which has a thing called Throwbacks, where they do showings of older movies, and I remember I really wanted to go because they were doing Shaun of the Dead for Halloween, and my partner had never seen it, except I already knew that Shaun of the Dead was a good film, so I was willing to invest that money. But that is also exactly why KDH ended up being in the middle of a perfect storm. You see, because of this IP hell that we're in, it is extremely difficult for original movies to receive the big screen treatment unless they're already attached to a media giant. And this has effectively left people starved for new stories and concepts that don't involve the same 10 characters or plot points. So instead, people have learned that streaming platforms are beginning to fill the gaps in that market. Netflix especially is well known for pushing out some amazing and often experimental original shows and films, and even rescuing some that were originally set to be shut down permanently, such as Nimona. Not only that, but I don't think they could have chosen a hotter subject matter than K-pop to focus this story on because, oh my god. I don't know about the rest of the world, but Korean media, food, and especially music have really seeped into the everyday in certain parts of the West. Thanks to the rise of the K-pop idol industry, multiple music groups like BTS, Blackpink, Twice, and many others have risen to international fame. On Spotify alone, before KDH came out, BTS held the #1 spot for the most streamed male K-pop group. I've even heard them on UK radio, which is very uncommon for non-English speaking songs. So imagine everyone's surprise when the Saja Boys broke that record within 5 weeks. Yep, a fictional boy band got to be Spotify's #1 daily top song, and not only that, but Huntrix's song Golden could potentially win an Oscar. There's a reason K-pop is popular. It's got catchy beats, all the idols are very stylish, and they adhere to a high beauty standard. And if we're being honest, I feel like there is no better way to embody these characteristics than by implementing them within fictional animated groups who can do all of this effortlessly by design. On a lesser note as well, but I feel like this also proves that people do in fact like musicals. There's been some speculation lately as to whether musicals are being lost to cinema, but if anything, I think the success of KDH kind of disproves this. When you actually get down to it, the music just has to make sense within the narrative. So yeah, in terms of breaking conventions, K-pop Demon Hunters are pretty much smashing it in every way. The hype generated by Sony Animation acted as a precursor to generate excitement for the film leading up to its release. The investment both from platforms and viewers for original films has risen eagerly to offset the predictability of conventional cinema and give the film a comfortable accessibility to millions of viewers who otherwise wouldn't watch it. And the success of K-pop as a current global phenomenon have all worked together to lift this film to the nigh unbelievable heights it's been achieving, and that allow it to continue to break records after only being released just over a month ago. Also, on a more personal note, it's just so refreshing to be talking about something doing well for once. It's been getting me down talking about everything wrong with the industry as of late, so it feels equally important to celebrate the wins like this when they happen. But that isn't quite what we came to talk about. So let's dive a bit deeper into the film itself and its key narrative themes. In order to comprehend the perceived impact of healing, we also need to look at the inverse, which is of course trauma. And there are actually many examples within animated media already. Now, especially in recent times, as media began to move away from the light-hearted Saturday morning narrative model and started to lean into more intricate and complex storylines, there started to become a trend of characters also following this mold. Characters who had deep-rooted connections or convictions who, in many of these films, would find themselves challenged head-on in order for them to grow in their personal journey ways is something that has become a staple. And once TV also began to adopt certain cinematic traits on a larger scale, including these intricate plots and multifaceted characters, the extended runtime allotted for TV allowed for the pros and cons of certain characters' personality traits to be further explored. For example, we all know him, we all love him, but the poster boy for this kind of thing is Prince Zuko from Avatar. And Zuko is honestly a great case study for this, both in terms of trauma and healing, because he's the son of a Fire Lord whose family for generations has ruled over the Fire Nation with an iron grip, affronted the other 3 nations within that time, and even eliminated one in a full-blown genocide, leading Zuko's father, Ozai, to be a foreboding figure not just to the public, but also his own family, his own son even. And a lot of Zuko's initial convictions towards capturing the Avatar in order to please his father's need for control and absolute authority are instantly challenged when he starts to travel around the world and step away from the worldview of the Fire Nation being this pinnacle of everything he should aspire to be. The more time he spends away from the Fire Nation and at one point on the run, the more he comes to understand why harmony is so important. And this is also extremely layered in the Avatar universe because Iroh undergoes this as well. Although in the context of the story, we tend to see Iroh at the stage that we expect Zuko to eventually get to, as they both engage in a cycle of breaking away and healing from the trauma of the Fire Nation's violent past. And then in Legend of Korra, it even goes a step further with Zuko's daughter, Fire Lord Izumi, explicitly refusing to involve the Fire Nation in another war after having been educated on how much devastation was caused by her own nation. You really can't beat Avatar for this kind of stuff, can you? Another huge example of this is also everyone's favourite human gem hybrid, Steven from Steven Universe. Say what you want about Steven Universe Future especially, but one thing it did magnificently was take the typical trope of giving a character who had gotten through multiple... Hello? Hello, Squeaky. Say what you want about Steven Universe Future especially, but one thing it did magnificently was take the typical trope of giving a character who had gotten through multiple near-death experiences a happy ending, the ability to actually evaluate what all of that trauma does to a person once they're supposedly at the happily ever after point. One thing that many people don't realize about reactions to trauma is that a majority of the time when you have been taught to live a certain way, your body is constantly in survival mode and essentially locks itself up to process everything later on. So what happens when later finally arrives and you're not in danger anymore? It begins to spill out and throws you for a loop because you thought everything was okay now, which is exactly what happened to Steven in Future. He had to reconcile all of his mother's past wrongdoings throughout the majority of the series, taking them on as if they were his own transgressions. And when it finally came time where people no longer needed him to fix everything, that need turned itself inward and manifested as a physical loss of control and a tendency to lash out. But thankfully, Steven Universe also shows the importance of having a support network to rely on. The gems came to become his family, and much like Rumi and KDH, they accepted him as he was and allowed him to become who he needed to be without suppressing or hiding it. And on that note, to bring us back around to K-pop Demon Hunters, while all of the external factors more or less leading to the film being a shoe-in for success may be quite fascinating on their own, in order for a film to resonate with people in addition to all the flashy visuals, funny faces, and catchy music, there also needs to be a realistic and personable emotional hook that keeps people's attention after the visuals and everything else has lured them in. And for KDH, that comes in spades with our protagonist Rumi. The big focus of the film is Rumi reconciling with the demon side of herself, due to having a human mother and a demon father. Her mother, also a former hunter and part of the previous hunter trio, the Sunlight Sisters, passed away when she was a baby, which resulted in Rumi being raised by her mother's presumed friend and fellow hunter Celine. Rumi is pretty much taught her entire life by Celine that the demon side of her needs to be suppressed and eventually eliminated. And while those who view the film at face value might understand that the demons are the bad guys, which makes sense because they are effectively harvesting and consuming human souls, when you look at it from where Rumi's standing, Celine is also essentially reinforcing the fact that Rumi is inherently flawed and has to work twice as hard while also hiding away certain parts of herself because of her birthright. And at this point, the film then becomes a lesson in teaching a person, a child even, to be ashamed of themselves for being born the wrong way. Now, I've seen some of the fan reaction to Celine following the film, and I think people are justified in disliking this aspect of her character, but to me, this showcases another example of someone experiencing significant trauma and being in a different stage of understanding and acceptance. She very clearly cares about Rumi, but that care is very misplaced when it comes to Rumi's particular circumstance. But that, in my opinion, is the overwhelming focus of the film, the power and influence of shame and how it can control you. It's the same power that Gima uses in the film to control Jinu, and what caused Rumi to shatter the Honmoon. And this theme is so exponentially important in the context of the current social climate, especially in places like South Korea, that it's kind of no wonder that the film resonated with so many people. The demon aspects in the film have been interpreted as representing a variety of different things, one such example being heritage. Rumi was never fully human like Jinu, which in itself is a very interesting aspect of their relationship. She was born half demon, and the film goes to great lengths to show that the way the hunters are taught to understand demons is fundamentally at odds with Rumi's entire existence, and that the very perception of all demons being unredeemable, unfeeling monsters deliberately undercuts Rumi's efforts towards being a good person. And it also exponentially widens the gap between Rumi and her support system, further isolating her and further engrossing her within it. And this also highlights why meeting Jinu and realizing that he was once human and still exhibits a certain degree of humanity, in addition to the fact that he does also introduce the notion that demons do in fact feel. Maybe not in the same way humans do, and maybe not all of them, but coming to understand that there is more to him than just these preconceived biases becomes so pivotal to Rumi's understanding and acceptance of her own identity, and thus sets her on a path of healing from these ideals that have been in place for literal generations. This is very much not something that is exclusive to Korea or even Asia, however, something that I have seen on multiple occasions being brought up in relation to how Korea views anyone who is not just deemed a pure-blooded Korean is just downright insidious. And I'm honestly kind of surprised that the film didn't really take a look at that through the lens of Zoe, considering she is actually from America. The second thing that demons are theorized to represent is mental health, which is both a very pointed narrative theme, as well as an almost painfully relevant social commentary on how mental health is perceived in general, especially in the East. A lot of work has been done since the turn of the century to normalize the discussion and general awareness of mental health, but unfortunately, in many parts of the world, that just isn't where things are at quite yet, which is probably in part due to a more community-oriented culture. Mental health is such a deeply personal experience that can be drastically different from person to person, that it can be really hard for a culture built on prioritizing other people to really carve out a space where such issues can be approached with the kind of understanding and consideration required. That's not to say that it can't be done, but it's going to be a lengthy process, and one of the first steps to these kinds of things is not always acceptance that I've noticed, it's exposure, which is why I see media as such a powerful gateway to discussing these things. You don't have to explain them, you don't have to get people on your side, you just have to let people see things. But in the grand scheme of things, there are still far too many sentiments of just ignore it, don't give in to it. If you work hard enough or achieve this one thing, it will go away and you'll finally be happy. And if you let it consume you, everything will turn on you, the world will collapse, and you'll be forever alone. Gee, where have I heard that before? Celine especially is a character that is such a dead ringer for adults who don't necessarily understand mental health and struggle to change their perceptions and get educated on the subject in order to help the younger people around them, and instead use it as a method of coercion and encouragement towards covering it up and hiding weakness. Much like how Celine does so with Rumi's patterns and asserts to all the girls that their fears and flaws must not be seen. And it really is such an upsetting scene when Rumi is literally bearing herself before Celine while at her most vulnerable and begging her for any scrape of acceptance or love that Celine just can't seem to give. It seems that she can only really love the parts of Rumi that relate her back to someone Celine actually cared about, which is Rumi's mother, and it feels almost cruel to see how Celine can't bring herself to touch Rumi's bare skin as a gesture of comfort or even look directly at her when Rumi is at her lowest point. This sense of mental anguish that is born from feelings of inferiority, distrust, and indeed shame is laid on heavily in so many aspects of the film, and not even just when relating to Rumi and Jinu. The other girls, Mira and Zoe, also have their own feelings of shame surrounding themselves, and Guimard uses this to his advantage when gathering everyone during the climax. At the height of his influence thanks to the Saja boys, the girls begin to hear their own insecurities whispered back to them in their heads and are hypnotized to follow the crowds, thus allowing their personal shame to lead them. For Zoe, she's described as too much and not enough, and that she doesn't belong anywhere, which Zoe is originally from Burbank in California, and as a result feels like she doesn't quite fit in either America or Korea. Not only that, but she's also hinted at being neurodivergent, as in the final song when Rumi snaps the girls out of Guimard's trance, her lyrics are, "Why did I cover up the colours stuck inside my head?" This could of course also be referring to her creative flair and quirky personality. However, creative tendencies also tend to be marginally higher and more likely to be explored when someone is neurodivergent, hence why this is considered to be the case by many. It also feels like a bit of a missed opportunity, again, that Rumi and Zoe didn't have any kind of clearly drawn parallels in the story regarding their circumstances. At the same time though, this was a film created by an American company, and it also does a very decent job of showing what the K-pop industry idealistically could be, so I'm willing to let it slide. Mira, on the other hand, is described as having experienced a lot of issues surrounding her biological family. She's referred to as a problem child and the black sheep because she's too wild, which, I'm gonna be honest, I struggled to see this a bit because we're only really told about it and not shown. She doesn't really behave any wilder than the other two, and her only visual indicator of this is through her style, but I also understand that what's considered being wild in Korea may not necessarily be as loud or in your face as what I might be imagining, so maybe that's where the disconnect is coming from, I don't know. But nevertheless, her voice whispers to her that she doesn't deserve a family, which to me speaks volumes to the impossibility of pleasing or even measuring up to certain social structures and people, which is arguably also the thing that brings the three girls together, since they are all running from this constant assertion that they are in fact not perfect, but they don't have to be when they're around each other. This is also very subtly hinted at whenever Mira is trying to comfort Rumi, and if you look closely, Mira is almost always the first to initiate contact or state that she has a concern, whereas Zoe more so seems to provide verbal reassurance. It's very clear that she has a lot of baggage surrounding not only how she was treated by her old family, but also around convention, and she is using her own rebellious spirit as a means of healing from it. It's no secret that Korea especially has a ginormous issue when it comes to adhering to social conventions and maintaining traditional views and all that, not standing out too much, not going against the grain, not showing weakness, not being too loud or too much, and being the most upstanding example of your community. That's pretty much the standard. Without even stating it outright, this film pretty much spits in that concept in a way, because firstly, pop stars by nature are intended to stand out, but the way in which this is achieved in K-pop in particular is also very intrinsic to this issue. Now, I'm not going to claim to be an expert on the K-pop industry, as all of this stuff is things that I've heard about or come to understand from watching stans from afar over the years, but the kind of standing out that is permitted in K-pop groups is extremely curated and controlled, to the point where everyone has a role they are expected to play, to the point where the performances and even interactions with the public are almost never indicative of how these idols truly behave behind closed doors. It's like the most dedicated public performance art I have ever seen, because these idols cannot do anything wrong. Not only out of fear of being reprimanded by their managers or agencies, but also by fans who hold them to this impossibly high standard, both in terms of performance, visuals, and general behaviour, and they risk being torn to pieces in the court of public opinion if they slip up in any of these areas. Pretty much every member of the Saja Boys have also been speculated to represent a different facet of toxic fan culture within K-pop. Abby represents the over-sexualization of idols' bodies and how they mostly exist to be ogled by fans. Mystery represents the fans' compulsive need to know every single little detail about their favourite idol without any kind of boundaries. Romance represents the inherent parasociality that is prevalent in the industry and how idols are expected to play into it to give fans a false ideal of being romantically available. Baby represents the infantilization of idols as a way of selling an image of innocence and naivety that makes idols not only seem safe and approachable, but also to market these groups to all ages. And if you want to be really meta about it, you could even see the girls defeating them in the climax as setting them free from these toxic standards. Honestly, the fact that the Huntrix girls have so much individuality and autonomy over their public identities and are still so very loved by fans, considering the reputation that real K-pop has, is a rarity that is only afforded to very few idols, usually the ones who end up getting international acclaim. And there are also a great deal many things that the girls do in the film that heavily contradict these standards and practices that are currently undergone by many in the industry. For one thing, the girls are seen eating a bunch of snacks right before a show, which, if you've ever seen the average K-pop idol, their diets are very closely monitored, and that is not a good thing. The girls also get shipped with different members of the Saja Boys, which is also seen as a huge no-no, since most idols are contractually not allowed to date or marry while they are in a group. But at the same time, these rejections of the current K-pop model through the film's insistence on letting the girls be themselves and be goofy and eat food, and also be cut some slack when someone's voice isn't at its best, can be read as the film subtly jabbing at and criticizing how these things are so polarized in the industry, and effectively showing everyone how it's done. And considering the amazing results it yielded on both Netflix and Spotify, I wouldn't be surprised if, even despite the fact that these groups are fictional, people take note and are vocal about wanting certain things to change on a grander scale. It's happened before. I also don't think any other character helped to exemplify this almost wishful portrayal than Bobby. Oh my god, I love Bobby. Everyone loves Bobby. He is everything a woman wishes a man could be, and I don't even like men. Even though he is their manager and ensures things run smoothly primarily for the fans, Bobby's top priority throughout the film is the girls' well-being. He books them vacations for working hard, he brings them snacks, he vouches for them when they're struggling or late for gigs. He got manipulated by Gima because he felt that he failed to keep the peace between them, and is just all around a sweet guy. Considering how many horror stories I've heard about terrible managers piling on the pressure, or hell, even gambling away all of an idol's earnings, in a world of shitty managers, be a Bobby. All of this, intentional or not, can play a very integral part towards encouraging people from all walks of life to evaluate the current state of things and want to usher in a new era of understanding and acceptance. For all the crap that people give younger generations, they really are leading the charge in terms of heading certain discussions on why traditions can't be modified to be more understanding of the people who partake in them. And that to me is why the new wave of generational healing in media can be such a powerful guide to how we approach life, and why K-pop Demon Hunters has hit such a high note with so many people. So, for some closing thoughts, while the film has already experienced so much success, I do hope that it continues to perform well and inspire the people who watch it. There have been whispers of a sequel due to how huge the numbers are already, but I haven't seen anything official on that yet, so I wouldn't get my hopes up too high. Though, considering that apparently there was a whole other 90 minutes, more or less, that was cut, I am intrigued as to whether a lot of my grievances with the film, particularly to do with the girls, would have been better elaborated. But for now, I'm happy to do a rewatch at some point and enjoy all the behind-the-scenes stuff, as well as some fan art. I may have had some comments, and I don't think I managed to cover absolutely everything I thought of the film, but I do still think that this is an extremely solid story. Sony really is crushing it lately. My hope for the film is that it can instigate a conversation, at the least, towards the aforementioned issues surrounding things like being of mixed heritage or having mental health issues in the context of Korea's pop culture, especially. K-pop is a gigantic and thriving industry, and idealistically, it would be amazing to see the generally positive attitudes and themes of acceptance showcased in the film act as a deterrent towards the more unsavory practices we have come to see from certain entertainment agencies. Like I said before, the first step to these things becoming accepted is exposure. You don't necessarily have to understand everything right away, and it's very unrealistic to expect people to do so, but allowing people the space to ask questions, explore concepts, and be proactive in their own ways without judgment is especially important. Do I think that's going to come about from one film that uses the industry as a backdrop? No, absolutely not. Like I said, I'm taking a very idealistic approach. Not necessarily a realistic one, but it would be nice to see where things go from here, now that it's out in the world. With that said though, I think I'm done. I've been talking for a very long time, and I need a nap. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed what I had to say. What do you think of K-pop Demon Hunters? Do you have any thoughts on generational healing in media? Any examples of your own? Feel free to let me know. And thank you, as always, to my amazing patrons. Payments were stopped for July so that I could take a proper break, but we are officially back to business in August. Thank you to my tip jar supporter, Pedanti Cat. Thank you to my YouTube peeps, Ash Valentine, Ed Boy, I Am Nail Smith, Lauren R., Lucas the Her, Manuel Legzon Gonzalez, Mystic Mind, Nombomb, and Stefka's Doodles. And an extra special thanks to my indie production supporters, Morgan LaFadeathin, Matty A, Kiyoshi, and Roundcat. If you'd like to become a patron, a link to my page can be found in the description. Until next time, everyone, bye! Olive, my little Olive. Hi.